The hum of fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly as Tessa adjusted the name tag pinned to her blazer, her eyes scanning the sleek, glass-walled office that overlooked the Lagos skyline. She walked softly, careful not to disturb the air of self-importance that floated through the company like perfume. To most of the staff, she was invisible, just the office girl who delivered coffee, answered calls, and kept the break room tidy. No one knew her last name. No one asked. And Tessa preferred it that way. It was safer for now. Because if anyone found out who she really was, the balance of power in the entire company would shift overnight. Tessa wiped down the conference table, her ears catching the sound of laughter from the executive floor above. She heard his voice, Jason Cole, head of operations. Loud, commanding, always smug. The man most people feared or desperately tried to impress. But not Tessa. Not since that day she overheard him boasting in the elevator about how girls like her were disposable. He'd never even looked her in the eye, but she remembered the smirk in his voice. Still, she said nothing. She smiled, nodded when spoken to, and played her part. Because the time would come when the so-called office girl would show everyone exactly who they were working for. Jason Cole stormed into the bullpen like a whirlwind, his tailored charcoal suit clinging to his tall frame, as if even fabric feared to crease under his authority. His eyes swept the office like a predator scanning for weakness, and as usual, they landed on Tessa. She was quietly arranging files in the corner near the printer, her head slightly bowed, pretending not to notice him. That only seemed to make it worse. Jason thrived on reactions. When he didn't get one, he created one. He sauntered over with an empty coffee cup in hand, slamming it on her desk without a word. The room paused. Conversations halted, fingers froze mid-type, and still Tessa didn't flinch. She took the cup, stood up, and met his eyes just briefly, long enough for him to register something he couldn't quite place. "Defiance? Calm? Royalty?" he scoffed. "Next time, try not to water it down like you did yesterday. Even my assistant makes better coffee," he said loudly, ensuring the room heard him. A few chuckles followed, nervous and shallow. Tessa offered a soft nod and walked away, the whispers behind her growing louder. But inside, she wasn't shaken. If only they knew the truth that the man throwing insults at her would soon beg for her approval, not her coffee. Tessa returned to the small office kitchen and began making the coffee, her movements calm and deliberate. Every insult from Jason was like a raindrop sliding off an umbrella, noticed, but powerless. She had been planning this moment for years. Her late father, the original founder of Cole-Royce Group, had built the company from the ground up before a silent takeover by so-called trusted partners stripped it from the family. But what Jason and the rest of them didn't know was that before his death, her father had rewritten the shares and legally named her as majority heir, with full control hidden behind a shell company until her 27th birthday. That birthday was just 3 days away. She pulled out her phone and checked her calendar. A final board meeting was scheduled on Friday. The plan was in motion. The lawyers were ready. The documents were signed. And once the announcement was made, the whole building would know that the girl who delivered coffee was actually the owner of everything they took pride in. She smiled to herself as the machine hissed, filling Jason's cup with exactly the bitterness he deserved. She didn't need revenge through drama. She had the kind of power that spoke through silence and signatures. Jason didn't even thank her when she returned with the coffee. He took the cup without looking up from his laptop, sipping with the same arrogance that dripped from every word he spoke. He was already in the middle of a loud call, berating a junior analyst for a missed decimal point. As Tessa turned to walk away, he snapped his fingers at her like she was a pet. "Wait, didn't I tell you to organize the storage room too? Or do you choose which instructions matter?" His voice cut through the office like a whip, drawing eyes from every corner. Tessa turned slowly, her face composed. "You did, sir," she replied simply. "I planned to finish it right after the mail run." Jason narrowed his eyes. That tone again, too calm, too collected for someone in her position. He leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Try not to act like you own the place. You're just the help. Know your place, Tessa." A few co-workers exchanged glances, but no one said a word. Jason had made it clear humiliating people was part of his leadership style. Tessa nodded once and turned away. Her hands were steady, her breath controlled. What Jason failed to understand was this: she wasn't just someone who'd rise above him. She already had. He just hadn't read the paperwork yet. Later that afternoon, Tessa stepped into the elevator with a small package in her hands, documents that needed discreet delivery to the legal department. As the doors slid shut, a tall, well-dressed man entered behind her. He looked familiar, probably from the board photos, but she'd never met him in person. He gave her a polite nod, then checked his watch. She noticed the engraved initials on his cufflink, RW. That could only mean one person: Raymond Wynn, the elusive co-founder of the firm who had mysteriously stepped back from operations years ago. Tessa kept her posture neutral, but inside, her heart beat faster. Raymond had been her father's closest friend, and the one who ensured her inheritance remained protected all these years. He glanced at her ID badge and then looked directly into her eyes. "So, you're the girl," he said softly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Tessa held his gaze, neither confirming nor denying. His smile widened knowingly. "I'll see you at Friday's board meeting. It's going to be historic." As he exited the elevator, Tessa leaned against the wall for a moment, steadying herself. Everything was falling into place. What Jason saw as a fragile office girl was about to become his new boss, and the empire he ruled with pride would soon answer to the woman he belittled daily. The next morning, Jason arrived late, as usual, tossing his designer briefcase onto his desk like it had wronged him. His tie hung loosely, his voice already sharp as he harped orders across the floor. Tessa, standing near the copier, barely acknowledged him. She didn't need to. In less than 48 hours, his voice would hold no weight. He had no idea he was standing on the edge of his own downfall, blindly confident in a position that was about to disappear beneath his feet. Across the office, whispers about the upcoming board meeting had begun. Rumors always swirled when the company's founders were involved. People wondered if someone was being fired. Restructuring? Merger? No one guessed the truth. Tessa calmly went about her day, avoiding the chaos and chatter. She knew every detail of what would unfold. Her legal team had already reviewed the agenda. Her name, Tessa Royce, was written boldly across the final page of the ownership transfer. The same name she'd hidden all this time. For years she had practiced humility. Now the truth would speak for her. It was during the Thursday afternoon birthday celebration for the head of accounts. The entire team gathered in the lounge area, cupcakes and soft drinks in hand. Tessa had been asked to help serve refreshments as always. She moved quietly between chairs, her tray balanced with precision. That's when Jason walked in, his usual smugness on full display. The crowd parted for him like royalty had arrived. Without warning, he turned to Tessa and scoffed. "Can't even hold a tray properly." His voice rang loud enough to turn heads. Tessa didn't respond. She steadied the tray and offered him a drink, as calmly as ever. But Jason wasn't done. He took a cup from the tray, looked her up and down, and then, in a move so stunning it silenced the room, he poured the drink over her head. The cold liquid soaked her hair, her blouse, and the floor beneath her. A gasp escaped from someone in the back. Others froze in place. A few even looked away. "That's for the watered-down coffee," he said with a smirk, tossing the empty cup into a nearby bin like it was nothing. Tessa stood still, dripping, silent. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him for the first time, not as a scared employee, but as a woman memorizing the final moment he would ever be in power. She walked away without a word, but in her heart, something shifted. She wasn't just waiting for Friday anymore. She was counting the seconds. As the office settled into a tense rhythm that afternoon, Tessa received a message on her phone. Unknown number. The text read, "Be careful. He's starting to suspect something." Her heart paused, then picked up speed. She had a feeling who sent it: Raymond Wynn. He always operated in silence, warning her only when necessary. She looked up and noticed Jason pacing near the windows, phone glued to his ear, brows furrowed. He wasn't barking orders this time. He looked unsettled. Moments later, Jason walked past her without a snide remark. That alone was suspicious. He went straight to the HR office and shut the door behind him. Tessa couldn't hear what was said, but her instincts sharpened. Jason's arrogance made him dangerous when cornered. If he had caught even a whisper of her real identity, he'd try to sabotage things before Friday. But it was too late. Every document was sealed. Every board member was prepped. Even HR had quietly been informed under legal confidentiality. Still, Tessa knew not to underestimate him. She'd seen what he was capable of when power was at stake. What he didn't realize was this wasn't just a shift in leadership. This was an inheritance reclaiming its place, and she wasn't afraid to fight for what was already hers. Jason stayed late that evening, long after most of the staff had gone home. Tessa, pretending to organize files near the back hallway, noticed his office light still glowing. Curiosity burned through her, but she didn't make a move. She knew men like Jason when they couldn't control something. They tried to uncover it. She could imagine him typing her name into confidential databases, trying to piece together why Raymond Wynn had taken interest in a low-level employee. Inside his office, Jason was indeed digging. He'd overheard one of the finance managers mention an unexpected name on the board meeting docket, Tessa Royce. It rang in his ears like a bell. He typed it into every system he had access to. Employee records showed nothing unusual, just an office assistant with no formal background. But the surname Royce unnerved him. It was the same name that had vanished from company headlines years ago. The same name that used to be at the top before the partners bought out the founder's stake. Jason leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. Something didn't feel right. He made a note to confront HR first thing in the morning. If there was something going on behind his back, he needed to crush it before it surfaced. What he didn't realize was that the surface had already cracked. And the woman he dismissed daily as just the help was the very reason the ground beneath him was about to give way. Thursday morning came with an eerie stillness in the office. People sensed a shift but couldn't explain it. Tessa moved through the building with her usual grace, but this time there was a weight in her steps, one of certainty, not burden. Her eyes briefly met Jason's as she passed his desk. He looked at her longer than usual, suspicious, as if trying to figure out where he'd seen her face before. She gave him nothing. No smile, no fear, just composure. That day, Tessa spent most of her time in the archive room, reviewing final legal printouts her lawyer had delivered discreetly. Everything was flawless. The timing, the handover, the statements. By tomorrow morning, her ownership of Royce Holdings would be made public. The board would vote only to confirm what the contracts already established. She wasn't stepping into power. She was simply reclaiming her seat. Jason watched her from his office window. Something about her movements felt too deliberate, too controlled. He felt like he was watching someone waiting for something big to drop. That unsettled him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the most powerful person in the building. And for reasons he couldn't explain, all that unease pointed to her. That night, long after the office lights dimmed and the last employee had left, Tessa sat alone in the break room, her phone pressed to her ear. Her lawyer's voice was calm but firm. "Everything is in place, Tessa. Once you step into that boardroom tomorrow, they'll have no choice but to acknowledge you. The company is yours." Her hand trembled slightly as she ended the call, not from fear but from release. The years of silence, the daily humiliation, the smallness she had willingly worn to protect her legacy, all of it was ending. She stood by the window and looked out over the Lagos skyline. Lights sparkled across the city, but her thoughts were far beyond the glow. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, "Never fight them with noise, fight them with position. Let them rise above you, so they never see you coming." And now, here she was still unseen, still underestimated, on the edge of a new era. Tomorrow, the building would look the same. Jason's voice might still boom through the halls, but the foundation of who held the power would change forever. In less than 12 hours, the office girl would walk into that boardroom. And when she left, she'd no longer be their shadow, she'd be the storm. The boardroom was unusually full that Friday morning. Executives, investors, and long-standing directors gathered in tailored suits, sipping black coffee and whispering about the mysterious agenda item. Jason entered fashionably late, confident as always, scanning the room with calculated ease. His eyes narrowed when he saw Raymond Wynn seated at the far end of the table, looking relaxed. Jason took a seat near the front, nodding at a few partners. Tessa was nowhere to be seen. Just as murmurs began to rise, the door opened quietly and Tessa walked in. Not in her office uniform. Not with a name tag. But in a sleek black power suit, heels clicking against the marble floor like clock hands counting down. For the first time, people actually looked at her, really looked. Jason blinked, his mouth parting in disbelief. She moved with quiet authority to the chair beside Raymond, who stood and smiled. "Let's begin," he said. "As of this morning, the majority shares of Cole-Royce have officially transferred to the rightful heir. Ladies and gentlemen, meet your new CEO, Tessa Royce." The room fell silent. Jason's face drained of color. He sat frozen, lips moving but no sound coming out. Tessa turned to him, her expression unreadable. She didn't gloat. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her presence alone screamed every word she had swallowed for years. The office girl was gone. The Queen had taken her throne. Jason finally found his voice, though it cracked under pressure. "This is absurd. She's not even qualified." He stood up sharply, his chair screeching against the polished floor. "She was just the assistant. You can't be serious." His words bounced around the room, trying to regain the dominance they once carried, but it was gone like dust swept off a shelf. No one echoed his outrage. In fact, most of the room avoided his eyes altogether. Raymond calmly leaned forward. "Jason, the documents have been vetted by all necessary legal bodies. The shares were transferred legally. Tessa Royce is now the majority owner of this company. Whether you accept it or not doesn't change the facts." His voice held the same chill as a winter wind, calm, yet unforgiving. Tessa finally spoke, her tone even and resolute. "I was never just an assistant. I was watching, listening, learning, and now leading." Jason's fists clenched at his sides. He looked around the room again, desperate for backup. None came. The very men who once cheered him on now sat in uncomfortable silence. Some even adjusted their chairs closer to Tessa. The power shift was visible. He'd been the loudest voice in the room for years, but now his volume only highlighted his irrelevance. Tessa rose to her feet. "Thank you, everyone." Meeting adjourned. "Jason, I'll need to see you in my office. Privately." The door to the CEO's office closed with a soft click, but the silence between Tessa and Jason was anything but gentle. He stood stiffly across from her desk, arms crossed, eyes burning with disbelief. Tessa, now seated behind the desk that had once belonged to her father and later, Jason's superior, looked at him calmly. Her presence filled the room, not with noise, but with authority earned in silence. "So, this was your plan all along," Jason muttered. The arrogance in his voice now lined with bitterness. "You played the victim just to humiliate me." Tessa folded her hands and leaned slightly forward. "You humiliated yourself, Jason. I simply waited for you to reveal who you really are. And you didn't disappoint." He scoffed, pacing in circles. "You think a few documents and a last name make you a leader? You have no experience running a company. This place will collapse under your reign." Tessa didn't flinch. "What I have, Jason, is vision. What I've earned is respect, not through fear, but through purpose. You ruled with intimidation. I will lead with integrity. And unlike you, I don't need to scream to be heard." Jason laughed bitterly, but the sound was hollow. He could feel the weight of power slipping from his hands like water. For the first time, he was facing someone he couldn't manipulate, belittle, or push aside. And worst of all, she was already ahead of him. Jason remained frozen, expecting Tessa to throw him out in dramatic fashion. He braced himself for public humiliation, a shouting match, maybe even security. But instead, she reached into a folder and pulled out a printed document. It was his contract, highlighted, annotated, and clearly reviewed. She slid it across the desk toward him, her expression unreadable. "You're not being fired, Jason," she said. "Not yet. You'll remain in your current role until the next evaluation cycle. But going forward, every department will report directly to me. You will no longer make executive decisions without approval. And your budget authority has been revoked pending audit review." Jason blinked. "You're keeping me?" Tessa nodded once. For now, you built systems I want to understand before dismantling them. You've always believed in results, Jason. Now it's your turn to prove your worth under real leadership. His pride twisted inside him like a knife. She wasn't just removing his power, she was watching him. And worse, she was giving him a chance to fail on his own. The ultimate humiliation for a man like Jason wasn't being fired, it was being sidelined while forced to witness his irrelevance day after day. As he left her office, the entire floor turned to watch. The man who once made others small with his presence now walked out feeling half his size. Meanwhile, behind the glass walls, Tessa sat in silence. She hadn't raised her voice once, but everyone in that building had heard her loud and clear. The atmosphere on the executive floor changed overnight. Where once Jason's name evoked fear, it now sparked whispers of confusion and quiet satisfaction. Employees who had tiptoed around him now walked with a bit more ease, casting curious glances toward the CEO's office, where Tessa worked tirelessly, quietly restructuring everything behind the scenes. Her leadership style was different, no public scoldings, no drama, no favoritism. Just clarity, fairness, and focus. One by one, department heads began booking short meetings with her. Some arrived skeptical, unsure if her power would last. Others came eager, ready to align themselves with whoever sat at the top, but all left with the same thought: she knows exactly what she's doing. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her words carried weight. She asked the right questions. She had vision, and more importantly, she listened. Jason noticed it too. He sat at his desk reading reports, but his eyes drifted constantly to the glass office where Tessa now sat with board members, legal teams, and once loyal allies of his. It was like watching a house he built now being redecorated in real time, and he couldn't stop it. For the first time in years, people weren't checking with him before making decisions. The crown he once wore had been passed silently, and the kingdom was shifting its allegiance. Late that afternoon, an internal memo was sent to all employees. It was short, formal, and direct, but its impact rippled through every department like a thunderclap. Subject: Leadership Restructure. From Office of the CEO, Tessa Royce. Effective immediately, all departmental strategies and directives will be reviewed by the CEO. A revised performance framework will be introduced next quarter. We look forward to a season of transparency, innovation, and collective success. That was all it said. No drama, no name-calling, no mention of Jason. But the message was clear: Tessa wasn't just here to sit in a big chair, she was rebuilding the company from the inside out. Jason stared at the email on his screen, his jaw clenched. It wasn't just the message, it was the signature. Tessa Royce, CEO. For so long, her name had meant nothing to him. Now it haunted every corner of his world. He opened his group chats, hoping for some banter, some loyalty, but they were quiet. Even his closest allies weren't defending him. Loyalty in the corporate world was a currency, and Tessa now controlled the vault. In that moment, he realized something terrifying. She hadn't stolen his position. She had earned it. On Monday morning, something unexpected happened. Jason walked past the break room and saw Tessa standing there, not as a junior staff member holding a tray, but as the CEO reviewing floor reports while sipping from a sleek mug. The same break room where he used to toss coffee cups at her without so much as a thank you. He paused in the doorway, caught off guard. She glanced up briefly, and this time he was the one unsure how to react. "Morning," he muttered. She gave a polite nod. "Morning, Jason." He lingered for a second too long, awkward in a space he once dominated. "Do you need anything?" he asked, the words tasting strange in his mouth. She looked at him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "I'm fine, thank you." It wasn't a power move. It wasn't revenge. It was something worse for Jason, at least. It was normalcy. Tessa didn't need to humiliate him like he had her. She simply existed above the noise, above the petty games, and that shook him more than any public takedown could. As he walked away, he realized something humbling: this woman didn't need to prove she'd risen. She was letting him sit in the shadow of her rise and feel the difference. And somehow, that was more powerful than any punishment. Tessa's assistant walked into her office that afternoon with a look of hesitation. "There's someone here to see you, ma'am. Says he knew your father. He didn't give a name, but he insists it's personal." Tessa nodded. "Send him in." The door opened, and an older man stepped inside. His suit was simple but elegant, his face weathered by time but sharp with recognition. Tessa stood slowly. Mr. Daniels, the former legal advisor to her father. He had disappeared after the hostile buyout. Some said he'd been silenced. Others said he fled out of shame. Now, here he was. "I watched the press release," he said gently. "Your father would be proud. He always said you'd find your way back." Tessa nodded, her voice softer than usual. It took a while. They tried to bury every part of him from this company, but roots grow in silence, Mr. Daniels. He smiled, his eyes slightly misty. "You're not just leading, Tessa. You're restoring legacy." She offered him a seat, and the two sat and talked for the first time in years about old promises, unfinished visions, and how the company had strayed from its purpose. As they spoke, Jason passed by the office and saw them together. He recognized Mr. Daniels immediately, and it confirmed his worst fear. She wasn't just making changes. She was rewriting the company's history, and this time, she held the pen. Jason sat alone in the executive lounge, the one he used to brag about having keycard access to. The city lights twinkled through the panoramic glass, but he didn't see them. His laptop sat untouched. His phone had no new messages. People no longer sought his approval. They walked past him now, some with sympathy, others with indifference. But the worst were the ones who smiled politely, the same way he used to smile at those beneath him. He thought about everything. The hallway jokes, the comments, the way he tossed Tessa's name around like it meant nothing. Now it was on the company's front door. Tessa Royce, CEO. The same girl he humiliated over a coffee order. Now the same woman signing off on his expense reports. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was loud. Regret began crawling in, not because he lost power, but because he hadn't seen her worth when it cost nothing to respect her. Across the building, Tessa stood in front of the founder's portrait, her father's. She straightened the frame gently, her fingers brushing the glass. There was still so much to do, so many systems to correct, voices to amplify. But she had taken the first step, and from now on every move would be made not from anger but from purpose. Jason, meanwhile, was still sitting in that lounge, wrestling with the one truth he could no longer ignore. He'd been defeated by the woman he never even saw coming. That Friday, Tessa stood at the podium in the grand auditorium of Cole Royce headquarters. The entire staff had been invited, executives, assistants, janitors, interns, everyone. It was the first all-hands meeting in years. Cameras were positioned, press passes distributed, and anticipation filled the air like electricity. Jason sat in the third row, arms folded, stone-faced. He still had a title, but the room no longer looked to him. Tessa stepped up to the mic in a soft grey suit, elegant and commanding. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "Today is not just a celebration of leadership, it is a return to legacy. My father, Charles Royce, founded this company on 3 pillars: excellence, integrity, and vision. Somewhere along the way we lost that path, but today we begin to walk it again." She unveiled a new employee initiative, one that included better mental health support, mentorship programs for entry-level staff, and anonymous feedback systems. She also announced that every department head would undergo leadership retraining, including herself. The crowd murmured with surprise. No CEO had ever offered to be trained alongside employees. Jason's chest tightened as people rose to their feet, applauding, not because they were forced, but because they believed in her. For the first time, Cole Royce didn't just feel like a corporate machine, it felt like a place with a soul again. As the applause continued, Tessa smiled, grateful, humbled, and completely at peace. The girl who once stood in silence was now the voice of the future. Later that day, Jason received a calendar invite he wasn't expecting, meeting with HR exit strategy discussion. At first, he stared at it in disbelief. No one had said anything directly, no angry confrontations, no public humiliation, just one quiet, professional step after another. And now, this. He knew what it meant. He was being offered a graceful way out, a chance to resign with his dignity intact, rather than face formal termination. He walked past Tessa's office on his way to the HR floor. She didn't look up as he passed, and for once, he didn't expect her to foo. He realized something sobering in that moment. She didn't need to punish him. His own actions had done that already. Every insult, every careless order, every ego-fueled decision had written the resignation letter he was now walking toward. At HR, the representative greeted him kindly, already aware he would resist. But he didn't. He signed the papers. No tantrum, no dramatic exit, just a quiet acknowledgement of the storm he had weathered and lost. As he left the building for the last time, he turned for one final look at the glass tower of Cole Royce. He expected to feel anger, but all he felt was emptiness. The empire he once ruled didn't miss him. It had already crowned its new monarch. And the people inside? They were finally free. With Jason officially gone, the atmosphere inside Cole Royce shifted like the change in season. For the first time in years, employees walked through the doors without the weight of fear on their shoulders. Meetings were filled with ideas instead of silence. Collaboration replaced hierarchy, and in small ways, the company began to breathe again. Tessa watched it all quietly. She wasn't interested in credit or applause. Her satisfaction came from the subtle changes: the receptionist, who no longer jumped at every sudden footstep, the young analysts who now spoke up without glancing nervously at the door, the cleaners who were greeted like they mattered, because now they did. Department heads who once reported to Jason now sought out Tessa's guidance, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely trusted her judgment. She didn't micromanage, but when she spoke, people listened. Every day, she built the kind of leadership culture her father once dreamed of, and every success, no matter how small, was a silent tribute to the man who believed in her before the world ever did. Her impact wasn't just within the walls of the company. Other firms began to take notice. Magazines requested interviews. Business leaders quoted her. But she remained grounded because she knew power was never about noise. True power was how people felt in your presence. And under her leadership, people felt seen. It was a quiet Thursday evening when Tessa stayed behind after everyone had left. Her office was bathed in the warm glow of the city lights. She sat at her desk, reflecting on how far she had come, not just in power, but in healing. As she tidied her drawer, her fingers brushed against a sealed envelope with her name on it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her father's. She carefully opened it, revealing a single handwritten note. "My dearest Tessa, if you're reading this, then you found your way back. I always knew you would. They may have taken the building, the name, even the power, but they could never take your purpose. You were never meant to scream to be heard. You were born to lead in silence, with grace, with vision. And when the time came, I knew you would rise not for revenge, but for restoration. Make them proud. But above all, make yourself proud. Dad." Tears welled in her eyes as she held the letter to her chest. It wasn't just validation. It was a reminder that everything she endured had a purpose. Every insult, every belittling comment, every coffee cup. All of it had brought her here. She stood and walked to the office window, looking out at the city her father had once dreamed of influencing. And now, through her, he was doing just that. Not through force. Not through legacy alone, but through a woman who had once been invisible and was now unstoppable. The following week, Tessa hosted her first executive dinner, a private gathering of directors, investors, and emerging leaders across industries. It was held in the Sky Lounge of the company's new innovation tower, a project her father once sketched in pencil, and she had finally brought to life. The view was stunning, but it wasn't the skyline that captured attention, it was the woman seated at the head of the table. Gone was the silent office girl. In her place sat a woman of presence, strategy, and quiet fire. She didn't speak for the first 10 minutes, allowing others to share ideas, laugh, and speak freely. And when she did finally speak, the room leaned in, not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect. "We are not here just to expand portfolios," she said calmly. We are here to build something that outlives us. That values people as much as profit. That rewards humility just as much as hustle." The table fell silent. Every person knew they were witnessing something rare, a leader who didn't just have power, she had purpose. In the corner of the room hung a framed photograph of her father, Charles Royce. Not for show, not for memory, but as a witness. His dream had not died, it had evolved. And now, it had a new voice. Hers. On the anniversary of her father's passing, Tessa stood in the private garden atop the Royce Foundation Centre Assisi, a project she had built in his honour, not for publicity, but for purpose. The wind rustled the leaves gently, and beside a bronze plaque bearing his name, she placed a single white lily. It wasn't just grief, she felt it was peace, fulfillment, completion. Behind her, the skyline shimmered, no longer a symbol of pressure, but of possibility. Cole Royce had become more than a company. It had become a movement, one that prioritized people over pride, one where janitors could shake hands with board members, one where women could lead without raising their voices, all because one girl refused to shrink under a man's shadow and chose instead to outgrow it. As she walked back to the elevator, her phone buzzed. Another media outlet asking for an interview, another brand seeking partnership, another young intern messaging to say, "Thank you for making me believe I belonged here." Tessa smiled and replied with one word, always. Because her story was no longer about proving anyone wrong. It was about building something so right that even time would honor it. She had been underestimated. She had been overlooked. And now, she had become unforgettable. If you enjoyed this story, please like and follow for more. Thank you.